So now I think we are going to hear from Grant.
Yeah.
Okay, Grant.
Thank you. Thanks.
Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you mind if I sit down, or do you need me to stand up? Okay, good. Thank you, Jenny. There's so many things to address in a discussion like that, and coming from Feather and Bone, where we're unashamedly about eating meat, there's obviously very direct challenges to what we do and how we do it. Just a bit of history. I was also a university student across the road here at UTS and did communications, and recently I find it really interesting that the sort of theory of that communications is starting to have a very direct sort of input into the way I think about what we do. It's always been a business based on ideas, and I'm not sure if they still teach it, but French post-structuralist was very big when I was there 15, 20 years ago. The idea of rhizomatic structures and rhizomatic learning, and I find that really interesting because our focus now is totally on soil health. So when we see animals and we see carcasses of meat, we see them as the concentrated essence of the goodness of soil, which is a completely different way of looking at it. What that does is it tells you that these are all outputs of a very complex system. And the rhizomatic structure is really interesting for that reason, because it means that, and this is how we imagine ourselves in Feather and Bone, is that we are part of a huge structure that can contact any other part of the system at any time. And that includes artists, agronomists, people who grow crops, people who grow animals, and people who basically nurture soil. And so one of the things that we're looking at is how can you eat meat and also get positive outcomes in terms of environmental outcomes, in terms of equity outcomes, in terms of the way people work on those farms. All of these are to do with the sustainability that we'd be looking for. And it's very easy to talk about sustainable farming and sustainable meat. It's really a very loose term. What we're sort of interested in is farming structures where the input level is either static or reducing, and the output level is either static or increasing. And that is a sustainable system. Most farming in Australia, and this is especially true of crop production, unfortunately, is on a very high input production system. And it has to be answered. So the questions around vegetarianism, to me, are the same questions that you need to ask yourself when you eat meat. What impact has this meal had on the world? And you can have positive outcomes from eating meat, you can have very negative outcomes from eating meat, and the same can be true for plants and vegetables. As Jeremy mentioned around the capsicums, I thought he was actually going to say imported organic asparagus from Peru. And that is even further than the riverina. That sort of becomes a really thorny issue. Would you prefer to have asparagus grown down the road with minimal chemical input, or organic asparagus flown in here from Peru? I'd go for the local myself. I'd also want to know how that farmer grew that asparagus, of course, and that's central to the way we structure the business. So just to be clear about how we work directly with farmers. We don't deal with wholesalers. We visit every farm that we source from, and that's partly to sort of find out, initially it was to find out whether they were actually growing animals outside, which is one of the other parameters of what we buy. We're not interested in intensively raised animals, we're only interested in animals that are raised on pasture. And so visiting the farm is a way of immersing yourself in what they do, becoming embedded in their rhizomatic structures and understanding their structures and production patterns. And it's a fascinating thing, and the more that they link together, the more we see ourselves as providing that link between the farmer and the consumer back to the farmer. And that can exist, it's not a linear thing at all. It's very much a dynamic, changing system of connections that we need to encourage. And that to me is the excitement about food production. To work in the area of food is central to the way that it always brings people to the table. You have to eat and you have to have that discussion. And everything branches out from that. And Jeremy sort of said it, it's the central thing. How are we going to feed ourselves? And if you can't deal with shelter, water and food, they're the basics of life. And so they're the things that we try and address quite directly. And if you address, water and food actually take care of themselves together. Soil fertility is not just the presence of carbon, it's the presence of carbon with nutrient around it that actually turns it into humus. And when you've got humus, you've got water holding capacity. And so we have trouble here with water because we don't have the carbon in the soil that we used to have. We've lost about 80% of carbon since white people came to Australia. Now that means we have no water holding capacity in the landscape, which we used to have. That means you get no penetrability, you've got no air in the soil, you've got no light in the soil. And these are metaphorical ideas, but they're also very literal ideas. In the same way that the rhizomes actually provide nutrient for you very directly, they also provide you with an idea of how you connect with people, animals, plants. And it's a very direct connection. So when those animals eat, they metabolize all those grasses, and it quite literally becomes the meat on them. But when you eat that meat, you metabolize that as well. So, and as a peak predator, and we're just like the sharks of the land, we're the top of that food chain, we want to make sure that the cumulative goodness is maintained right to the top. So when I see charts like that, I have trouble with them because they never sort of say what the assumptions are. If they're based on grain-fed, lot-fed cattle, absolutely, I agree totally. It is a totally unsustainable way of raising meat for human consumption. But you can't just sort of say, this is what lamb and beef takes to produce. You just can't say it unless you say, in this particular system. And you have to be really specific about it. I mean, there's no doubt that that ruminants are a key part of creating fertility in the world. They're not fertility sappers. Before white people got to America, there were 60 million bison on the plains of America. There are now none, and they've been replaced with 40 million cows eating corn grown on the same land. A net loss of 20 million animals, and probably in terms of biomass, more like 40 million animals. And a dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico as big as half of Victoria. Now that is a very bad exchange, but what you had there, importantly, was a system that was naturally generating, where those animals survived on those prairies and those grasslands totally by themselves. It was a natural system of soil and fertility replacement. The thing is, if you take animals out of the landscape, you're taking out one of the huge fertility generators. They are there for a very good reason. They are one of the key cyclers of nutrient. The soil does its job, but the animals do their job. And that starts at key animals like cattle or natively kangaroos, and then it works all the way down to the system to the microbial level. So really what we're dealing with is the microbial processing of fertility. So we're not butchers, but that's what we do day to day. What we're really doing is dealing with the production of fertility and how you hold water in the landscape. So further to that, visiting the farmers, we only buy whole carcasses from them. So very confronting. Guys, usually guys, carry big bodies of meat off the truck. Fantastically, it's completely unpackaged. It's one of the last things in the world that is not wrapped at all. It comes to you as a single body. If it's a big one, it's cut in 4. If it's a really big one, it's cut in 8. And then we cut everything where we are. And it's that by doing that, we sort of guarantee 1, transparency, 2, that the farmer concentrates on what they're doing, which is raising animals in a sustainable fashion, and 3, that you're embedding the business of meat production with dignity. And by that I mean that it's no small thing to kill an animal, to eat it. It's no small thing. Every culture has respected, probably until ours, until commodification and industrialisation, has respected the life that it took. And we've lost that. So what we're trying to do is imbue that system with dignity again, which means recognising, confronting the realities of eating meat. It's not pretty to kill something. So we need to visit the abattoirs, and we do. And it's the one point where we touch and connect with the industrial system effectively, or the commodity system, because we're obliged for the animals to go through licensed abattoirs. We can't get home-killed meat at this stage. It can only be consumed on the farm where it's killed. Food Authority requires that it goes through a licensed abattoir before it comes to us. So that's the one time where it sort of touches the business, the commercial business. But by buying whole bodies, we guarantee that they're the ones that we get, because meat substitution is a huge issue and will continue to be an enormous issue, especially in terms of exports to Asia, where our clean green, as fallacious as that might be, image of Australian production is highly valued in China, and there's a lot of substitution of fruit, vegetables and meat. So we guarantee what it is that comes to us, and we don't say much about it being sort of delicious or tasty. That's sort of really not our concern. What we're really concerned about are the qualities of it. It was a 3-year-old Wagyu cross steer grown at this farm. It was killed at this age. We've dry aged it for up to 6 weeks, and this is the cut. And that's sort of all you need to really say, because if you get into the cul-de-sac of talking about what's tasty and delicious, then you're completely lost. That's just it's a subjective standard which doesn't serve your purposes of understanding what it means to eat this stuff. So that's part of the confrontation. It's a bit trickier when it comes to pigs and chickens. Ruminants are one thing where you can use them as a really critical element in the fertility of the landscape, and through very specific grazing stimulate the growth and the creation of soil. And that's what well-managed ruminants can do. But with pigs and chickens, they're omnivorous. They don't have the same, pigs have virtually the same gut results. And when you look a pig in the eye, you understand that it's as likely to eat you as you are to eat it. Which is a very sort of, it's a very different form of farming when you're dealing with an animal that looking you up and down and thinking, yeah, just wait till he falls over, I'll get him. And that's a very serious sort of encounter. So they're a highly fecund creature. They require a lot of input, and it's grain-based with a protein input, which is usually either fish-derived, we might talk about this in a moment, or meat-derived. And that's how pigs are grown. But we grow them outside, or the farmers that we work with grow them outside. Pigs can be highly destructive creatures, but they're also really critical as well. They are, and to mention Joel Sullivan, he will talk about the use of pigs on his farm, critical disturbers and little interveners and disruptors of the system, but you have to manage that disruption, which is the same as any sort of livestock management. We think of farmers as orchestrators of all the sort of different elements at their disposal, which is the animals, which is the plants, which is water and air. And if you can't orchestrate those things effectively, you can't produce a sustainable system of production. And that applies to whether it's meat, grain, fruit or vegetable that you're growing. It's the same principles apply. I come from a wine background, and what strikes me as really interesting, and I sort of hadn't realised it when I started, was that that meat ages just like wine. And the same range of flavours develop in dry-aged meat that develop in wine. So that idea that a carcass is just a representation of the land that it's grown on is very direct. No one has any problem with that, thinking about that in terms of wine and terroir. The character of a wine is represented, and you can go on endlessly about how sort of beautiful and wonderful that is. Well, why not an animal doing the same in a really controlled system? But it has to be through a system of diversity. So the thing that we're interested in is there should be at least 50 different species of grasses and perennials in those fields. If there's not that, you're sort of not in the hunt. That's the diversity that will give you resilience, it will give you water holding capacity, and it will also allow you to create humus. You won't find that in a wheat crop. What you'll find is a monocultural system, where conventionally they're sprayed 4 or 5 times before they've even come out of the ground. I mean, we're trying to work away from that. What we're trying to do is look at mixed systems, and animals have a really key role in this, mixed systems of production, where their fertility goes back and creates the grains and the fruit and the vegetables as well. Soil is, in effect, a huge living and dying animal. It's living and dying all the time, and the faster that process happens, the more production you get. And when you do monocultural production, you slow that right down. So the farmers that we're working with are working with complex systems of multiplicity, and that's where the rhizomatic structure comes in again. All those things that contact each other and rub up against each other, producing unexpected and magical results. That's fertility. But I mean, we are no different. We are just the embodied, collection of everything that we've imbued, both genetically and what we've fed ourselves with. So let's get to genetics. Genetics are really critical in this issue. And what's happened, and it's happened especially in the plant world and fruit and vegetable world and meat world, is a dramatic reduction in the range of genetics that are available to us. Our forefathers and mothers 200 years ago would have eaten a huge range of stuff, a huge range of different animals, a huge range of different vegetables, unknown to us today. We're down to about 6 apples commercially. We eat 2 chickens in the world. Now, chickens are a really interesting animal. They're an incredible converter of feed to meat. They run at about 1.6 to 1, which means that for 1.6 kilograms they take in, they produce 1 kilogram of meat. Now, that's an amazing conversion ratio, rivaled only by fish. But we eat 2 chickens. Now, whether they're grown outside, which are the ones that we buy, they've all come from the same place, one-day-old chickens. They've all come out of the same factory. Most of those, 95% of those, are destined to be grown in an absolutely horrific and depressing 40,000 bird shelter, which produces unbearable amounts of toxic manure that can't be dealt with in the system that they produce. And then a few of them make their way onto a field where they're spread out enough where their manure actually is extremely useful and produces great fertility, but as long as they're moved along. But the same chicken at 5 weeks, basically it's just going to sit down because it's bred in such a way, you're looking at a genetic cul-de-sac. That chicken is the end point of a genetic drive to produce breast meat. So if you want to change the way people eat, and absolutely, we would always say eat less meat, but eat better quality meat. Eat from all around the animal. Honour the animal by eating all of it. And at the moment, we've just got a drive to eat chicken breast. So for a vegetarian that occasionally eats meat, I wasn't citing you, but I'm just drawing on this, and they choose to eat chicken breast when the odd time when they do eat, I think that's a really destructive model. Intensive that's the worst thing that you could do. You really need to eat, the head or the feet or something else. Go for that. Stimulate production of the whole animal, because all at the moment they want to do is essentially grow a chicken with 2 breasts and nothing else. There's one disease that chickens suffer from. It was first noted in turkeys in about 1980, so it's known as the Oregon disease, and it's called deep pectoral myopathy, and it's gruesome. It's the tenderloin sits under the breast, and it goes gangrenous. And the reason it does that is that the chickens now are bred in such a way, and this is why it happened in turkeys, because they were the first to get this sort of genetic sort of changes. They're bred in such a way that when they flap their wings, the blood, the tenderloin engorges and needs more blood flow. It can't do it because the breast is so large it blocks off the blood supply. And so what happens is that the tenderloin, you pick it out of the carcass, it's green like an almond and crisp. It doesn't actually affect the rest of the carcass weirdly. It's just that single muscle. And so the intensive industry is now thinking, okay, so how does that happen? This happens because chickens flap their wings. I know. We're going to stop them flapping their wings. So that's their reaction to, the problem of chickens flapping their wings. We would not see it as a problem at all. What we see is that we need different genetics that allows the chicken to flap its wings outside, and then the exchange is sort of something that actually you might be able to take home and think that's a reasonable exchange. You cook that chicken one night and maybe eat half the meat. The next day it would form a lunch. The body would form a basis of a soup which would be mainly grains and vegetables, and the chicken carcass gets thrown in there for a bit of body and flavour. That's the way. So you might eat meat 5 times a week, but one time that might just be an ounce of chicken fat that's a remnant from a meal you cooked 5 days ago. That to me is a very good value exchange and a very sustainable exchange, providing the genetics are right and the production system is right. So we're up to a point where I found that slide very interesting about the 25% snack foods. Because, of course, the new problem is that the poor now are fat, not thin. In history, you could always pick the poor people. They were the thin ones. Now they're the fat ones, essentially. So the overfed and badly fed industrialised world, largely poorer people, are fatter, and enormously so. So in Australia, of course, I think we're almost or about to overtake America as the fattest country in the world. I mean, we've got to do something about the way we feed ourselves, and I would agree with the CSIRO that taking out the sweets out of that would be a much more effective production, especially if the meat component was raised in the ways that we're suggesting. It would be a much more effective way of dealing with a whole range of health issues. Where am I up to in time?
We're close, but
it's
still interesting. So
okay. Nice to get a progress report. Thanks, Jeremy.
Hands up, move forward. No, just another minute or so.
Okay, good. That's what I was sort of trying to get to. Thank you.
Yeah, we'd like to have time for questions. I mean, there's another half an hour to go, and we definitely want to get from Ashley, of course. So.
Yeah, of course.
Well, if you want to wrap it up.
Well, yeah, I would. I'd just sort of say that, as a consumer, your role in the food system is the critical role. You are a connector and a stimulator of production. You can change things through the decisions you make about what you buy and who you buy them from. Are you going to support a farmer that is willing to run a herd at a tenth of what most people run them because he considers or she considers that is what his land and her land could sustain in that season? And it will change year to year. What we need are responsive farmers that we support in the most direct way. Unfortunately, this is where politics have come into it, we support farmers who are actually the poorest farmers, because the ones who need our support most and first are the ones who have the least resilient farming system. We should be farming people, funding farmers. Farming people, my God. I'm not against it. Exactly. There's plenty of us, and there's a whole area. We haven't even we're going to touch on dogs, and you know, I think you should.
Supporting farmers.
Would not taste good.
Humans?
Humans.
Well, New Guineans call us long pigs, so it would depend totally on what we ate, I think.
I was thinking of the junk-eating humans.
Well, why are you there? I think you go for it, like I'm saying, you go for the healthiest animal that you possibly can, you know, and I wouldn't go for some junk-eating thing. That's exactly it. So, and that's exactly it. So if you eat an animal out of a junk-eating system, which a feeding system effectively is, you're going to get that. That's exactly, it's like the sweets of the junk of the meat world. I'm suggesting that you eat an animal that is fully mineralised, that has access, free access to the largest diversity of plant species that it possibly can, and that can be introduced species. One of the farms that we source from, his whole farm is now totally perennial native grasses. That's what he's let it revert to. There was a bit of introduced species that it's gone. And his worm population has shot up, his dung beetle population has shot up, he's still getting growth rates that are astonishing, his water holding capacity has increased out of this world. It is possible to grow high quality meat and return carbon and have a positive carbon relationship. So that is, yes, there are huge emission issues, but you can store more carbon through through the strategic and managed maintenance of grazing systems than you're giving up. And that is the message of hope. Once you have the genetics right and you have the management system right, is that this can actually work. We've only got a small amount of arable land in Australia. We've got a lot of land that's not suited for cultivation. Animals play a really critical role in those lands. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Brad. That was